Over the next half an hour, I want to give a rough example of the sort of package holidays that we've been doing for 52 years. And when I say we, I'm talking about our group. Some of the expeditions there may only be 2 people, but we've got 52 people on the group from 9 different countries. And pretty much all of them have got nothing in common other than the fact that I have never paid anybody anything at any time. And yet they are still coming 52 years later. Obviously, quite a few are dead, so they're not, but the rest of them. What we've been trying to do is to break existing world records of a geographical and physical nature, and to do it before anybody else, especially the Norwegians. I saw a notice asking for officers to apply for the SAS, so I got sent to Hereford, which is where you go to get selected. There were 130 soldiers trying to get in, 20 other officers, pretty much all of them built like brick houses, many ex-para. None of them came from a cavalry regiment. They called me a donkey walloper. I lasted a little while in Germany, and then I applied to go to Arabia to join the army of the Sultan of Oman for 3 years, fighting communists who were trying to get into Oman in order to block the Straits of Hormuz, 80% of the free world's oil at that time. This is the navy of the Sultan of Oman. It's the army. On board the navy, obviously. Then we have this half the Sultan's Air Force, photographed from the other half. This is one of, I had 60 blokes with 6 Land Rovers, a recce platoon in South Arabia, below Saudi Arabia, below the war zone. We also used to sit in caves over the infiltration routes, waiting and waiting, being bitten stupid by ticks and fleas for 6 days. That's all the water you can carry. Sometimes one would, get a bit bored, and I can remember back in London at the Natural History Museum, they desperately wanted new lizards from this area, so I was trained to recognize new lizards. And if you're waiting to kill people and no one comes, you might as well do something useful. Chameleons out there, you may know, if you put a chameleon on a green leaf, it goes red. Put it on a red flower, it'll actually turn red. People say if you put them on tartan blankets, they will explode. Got married to the girl when we came from South Africa to England. She was a next-door neighbour. She was 9, I was 12. Married her, she was 21, I was 24, and we started trying to make a living through doing expeditions. That was the lost frankincense city in the desert. We started in '68, Ginny and me, looking for it. 8 expeditions later, over 26 years, we found it. It's now the biggest excavation works in Arabia. Over 30 years, we did 29 expeditions, gradually getting more ambitious and getting more sponsorship. 2 examples. One was the Nile, 4,000 miles long, the longest river in the world. Ginny, at breakfast, decided we would be the first people to go up it, and that we would use Pioneer 2-stroke hovercraft, because she'd seen in the Guinness Book of Records that the Hoverhawk had the world record of hovering without a breakdown for 8 hours around a gravel pit in Peterborough. So obviously the right model for the Nile. About 1973, we had a problem because the media, we need media coverage, you don't get sponsorship. And the media in Britain at that time, I don't know why, didn't want any more hot expedition coverage, they only wanted polar stuff. So at breakfast, Ginny switched her attention to polar records. Difficult because there are only 2 poles and this number wasn't going to increase in the near future. She found that the Norwegians, if you excuse me swearing, they basically had all the polar records, except they desperately tried to be the first humans to go round Earth that way without flying, 52,000 miles. And so Ginny sent me to a library to find out the best route. I discovered that at the bottom of the world there was a white bit called Antarctica, which had rather like one of these tables with nothing on it at all, for 2,500 miles, never crossed by any human by any route from side to side. We said goodbye to the base commander, which is the nastiest job of all. That's why I gave it to Ginny, because the whole thing had been her fault for thinking of it. But she was a small person and couldn't roll 45-gallon drums around, so a man had to be living with her on and off for 2.5 years. So I didn't want somebody who was physically attractive in that position. But luckily, we found a Yorkshireman for that particular job. So no boat, Morse code message to Ginny, who was up on the last island, uninhabited basically, with 2 huts, waiting for us, very upset when we said what happened to the boat. We had to walk over that lot. The other guy, Charlie, on the left here, in the boat, one of his feet, all the skin fell off because of being soggy and had raw nerves. So for 180 miles on metal snowshoes, his language got very bad. He then developed hemorrhoids, and it got worse. And then one day he fell over and he cracked his head open on a rock and his eyes filled up with blood and he started to whinge. 8 months later, we said goodbye to Ginny and set out on the difficult bit. That steam is coming from open water at -50. Water freezes at -2, but the full moon breaks everything up with the tide and so on. Horrible place to be. We finally reached 500 miles out over that stuff. We became the first human beings ever to reach both poles the hard way. Stuck a flag there, which is pretty stupid, because within an hour that flag will be a mile away from the pole, because it's sort of floating on top of the sea. At the South Pole, the Norwegian team dropped out. We were in a very bad way, mentally and physically, and the only reason we carried on from the pole down the other side, the other half of the journey to the Pacific coast, was because Dr. Stroud had a contract with Europe's top medical magazine on the topic of advanced starvation. And at the pole, he weighed us and found that we were starving even more than he had hoped. And he was determined to complete the article, so we carried on. I began to hate him. He's a wonderful bloke. I've done 28 years with him since. But on that occasion, his scientific program was over the top. Every 5 days, he made you drink a container of liquid costing $1,000. And for 24 hours after you drink it, any liquid coming out of your body had to be collected in bottles, especially urine. And I can tell you that outside in a wind at -60, filling a pee bottle is very dangerous for that part of your body if you're a male. Although, obviously, at that temperature, the difference between males and females is not great.